Alright, so I had a friend bring by his F-250. He asked me, he said, hey man, can you put a transmission in for me? I said, yeah, you know, no problem, I'll do it this weekend. And he brought me a used transmission by. So now we're fixing to get started. This is a 6.4 Powerstroke, and I'm gonna try and give as much details as possible so everybody can see, you know, exactly what's involved and how long it takes. I won't be able to give an exact time estimate until after I'm done. I've not worked on a 6.4 before. Everybody says it's a nightmare, but I guess we'll see. Alright, well, let's get started. We're going to start by draining down the transmission fluid on it, so that way it'll lose some weight, drop the drive shaft, pull the transfer case off of it, unhook the battery, remove the starter. There's a cover on it apparently to get to the torque converter bolts. After I get the torque converter bolts out, then we'll unbolt the transmission from the block, and then we'll start setting it down from there and see where we're at. We should be able to, that should be all of the steps in sequence, but I'll video it as I go so that way you can see what works and what don't. Alright, so now we took and drained the transmission pan. It's a 13mm bolt that fits it. We pulled loose. We took off the battery cables. We're going to pull the starter now and go from there. Okay, so after more messing with it, the starter actually does not need to come loose to take the transmission out. So far the transfer case has been removed. It is extremely heavy. The transmission itself is actually heavy enough. It finished blowing out my floor jack to where it won't hold the transmission up. It keeps leaking down. Transfer case in the bed of the truck now. Remove the drive shaft, and it was easier to undo the front U-joint from the front axle. And then if you look, there's a pin in here, and then there's 6 bolts that bolts it to the back to the transmission. They're all 13mm bolts, and then undoing the rear drive shaft was fairly easy. So now the transmission, trying to get the torque converter bolts loose is another thing. It's not this thing is not very easy to work on, so I'm gonna have to see how, you know, if it's gonna work out better. The transmission's bad, so I still want it to be rebuildable, so I'm going to see what's going to work better. If I'm going to try, and if I can't get the torque converter bolts loose, then because it's been taken out before, I don't know if the bolts are rounded off or what. So if I can't get it loose, then I'm going to pull the transmission with the torque converter still mounted, and just pull the torque converter afterwards. But that's where we're at right now, so I will keep you updated as I go. Okay, so here we are the next day. I ran out of daylight last night, and so here's where we are. Cross members out, the transfer case is out. We had some trouble with the starter, the harness is off, and the drive shaft's out. The cross member, we had 221s for the transmission mount, 3 21s for the passenger side of the transmission mount, and 3 18mm for the Yeah, no, 15 millimeters for the driver's side. And so now we're to a point to where all we got to do is go ahead and pull the torque converter and set the transmission out. So granted, there's no problems. There's a window on the front of it. I'll try and get a close-up video, but we'll get the window out and the torque converter bolts off, and then take all the at least with it tilted down now, we can get the upper transmission, the bell housing bolts off the back of the block. Then we'll be able to inspect everything. I did notice that while we started taking it apart, where the starter is on the passenger side, we did notice some coolant leaking. We're going to inspect that a little better and see if there's a freeze plug leaking or if we have a coolant hose on the back of the block leaking. As far as anything else, I don't think I'm leaving anything out. Whoever put this transmission in, I know it's had a motor put in it, but whoever bolted it to this motor, they impacted every single bolt. For the love of God, please don't do that, because you will regret it later. It has been terrible trying to get these bolts loose, because you know, they pulled the cab to put the motor in. I'm not pulling the cab, I actually have it in my driveway right now. So I'm trying to reach all this stuff, and you can't get an impact to it without the cab being pulled. And so do not do that. It is way too, it makes things a lot harder when you go to take it apart. So now I'm out here on next morning, about to get started. My jack blew out, had to go and get another jack from a friend of mine that's big enough for the stuff for this truck. So now let's get things going, and I'll keep y'all updated as we go. Now we're up under the bottom, and you can see right here there's an opening to take the bolts off the flex plate and the torque converter. And up, I really should have my light, but up here there's another opening. You can take that loose to get the bolts off the torque converter. Either way it goes, both of them will work. This one up here if you need a longer extension or something. This one down here if you're able to reach it with just a deep socket and a ratchet, you can be able to do it right there. I forgot to add in right here with this shift linkage, when you go to take it off, pull that down, stick a little screwdriver in and lift this up, and then you can pull it up and it unlocks it from that side. And when you go to put it back, you squeeze it and it locks it back down around this ball right here. Hey guys, I'm back, and well, the transmission is out now. As you can see, it's right here. I will say this, it had to come out with the torque converter still attached to the flywheel. Reason being is because this is a remanufactured motor, and somebody that put in the motor rounded off a lot of the nuts for the torque converter when they put them in. So I had a lot of trouble trying to get them to come loose. Well, now that I got the transmission out of the way, I'm gonna have to try and vice grip them out to get them off, to get that torque converter out, and it's gonna need new nuts. Other than that, that's kind of where we are right now. It was an absolute, nightmare trying to get the transmission to come out. This ear specifically right here was hanging on the floor, on the padding on the floor under the bottom of the truck. Had to rotate the transmission to the driver's side in order for that ear to come loose and be able to slide backwards enough to come off of the torque converter without damaging either the transmission or the torque converter. So, but that's where we are right now. All of the bell housing bolts, I think there's what, 7 or 8 of them. They were 13 millimeters. They were fairly easy to take loose. Did not have to unbolt the starter. I thought we did, but we did not have to unbolt the starter at all. It's still hanging in place. There is a bolt in the top of the starter, which the people that put the motor in did not put that bolt back in place. So you don't have to worry about that. That's the one that actually comes through the starter and goes to the bell housing on the transmission. Other than that, it was fairly easy. All of the transmission lines were 19 millimeter 3/4 line wrench, and the crescent wrench behind it to hold the adapter in the transmission. Pulled those out, put Ziploc bags over the transmission lines, and then zip tied them so that they won't fall off or leak transmission fluid everywhere. I did leak transmission fluid, but it was leaking out of the torque converter when the transmission started to come out. So I'm not worried about that little bit that got on the ground. Now I'm fixing to go in there and get the torque converter bolts loose. And when I do, I'm gonna put the new torque converter in the new transmission and then go back together with it. So it should be driving tonight, tomorrow, something in that range. We actually have a transmission that came out of a truck that had a blow motor. Anybody that knows anything about the 6.4 Powerstrokes knows that they're quite problematic, so it's understandable. The motor blew in the truck, and the guy said the transmission was still good. So it's easy to believe that. So now on to getting that torque converter off and checking the coolant leak that was on the back of the block. And as long as that's all good, it's a remanufactured motor, there shouldn't be an issue. So we ain't got to worry about freeze plugs being leaking in the back. But I'm still going to check them just to be sure, because I was not comfortable with it. I think I touched off on everything. So that should be about it. Yeah, get these loose and then we'll start going back. Once the torque converter's off, we'll start going back together with it. So, alright. Alright, so now the transmission has been removed, finally. We got it sitting right here on the bed of the truck. It did not want to come out. Finally got the torque converter out. Everything has been removed completely. There's the flex plate. Didn't find anything leaking like we thought we would. So there's not an issue with freeze plugs or anything. So I will say this ear on the transmission right here, that was hanging on the sound barrier underneath the truck, right up there. I wish I could kind of zoom in, but where that padding is, it was hanging up there and caught and didn't want to allow the transmission to move backwards, but was able to get it. Yeah, so right there on the left hand side is hanging up and creating a lot of a lot of resistance trying to get it to remove out, but now it's out. And tomorrow I'll be working on putting the used one that he provided back into the truck, and we'll be able to move forward from there. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment. It's not something I would suggest anybody to just want to voluntarily do. It was not easy at all. Most people use a lift. They lift the body up off the frame, and that's how they get it out. I didn't have a lift. I'm actually doing this in my driveway to help a friend out, and it's just not a driveway job, but I already started, so I'm committed. And moving forward now, I know not to take on any 6.4 Powerstroke jobs like this, not as long as I live in this neighborhood. Like I said, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to comment. I'll be glad to help. When you go to, another thing, when you go to remove the bell housing bolts, it's a good idea to take a 12-inch extension along with a 24-inch extension, and you can reach all the bolts from the back. The transmission will drop down just enough to where you can see every single one of the bell housing bolts, and you're able to get them all out with that long of an extension. You're able to reach from the tail shaft up to the bell housing and get them all out. Trying to make sure I remembered everything, but I think that's about it. Like I said, if you have any questions or anything, just comment and ask.